So again, I've been given this title, Information Management at 10,000 meters um, between us, but much to the dismay of Liz, who wanted to go with feet. But we felt that meters was more international. No, but seriously. So yeah, a bit about myself, as Tina was saying. So I'm a public health physician myself. I'm kind of subspecialized in medical statistics and health information. And that's basically what I've been doing for the past 20 years. I wouldn't define myself as a techie. I'm not adverse to, say, using the internet or using electronic resources. And I feel this is critical in this day and age for being able to do infodemic management. I mean, you don't need to be a mega IT guru, but obviously you can't be afraid of digital tools. I think I could safely say that I'm a workaholic, despite always making resolutions to slow down. So, in a nutshell, basically, I'm just trying to show you that I'm hoping that many of you can identify with my role here in Malta. Incidentally, for those of you who have never heard of Malta, I don't blame you. It barely features on the map, very small island country in the Mediterranean Sea. Nonetheless, that brings about certain challenges and opportunities, so to say. In terms of challenge, despite Malta not being a developing country in terms of, in economic terms, um, we still have usually challenges related to especially human resources. Okay, so obviously there's very few of us. So in order to cope with all the demands of various services that we need to provide, including infodemic management, of course, it can be a bit daunting. So these are my hats, as Tina was describing. So I'm a director within the Ministry of Health for Health Info. I also have an academic hat. So I'm head of department for public health at the local university. And despite sort of trying to do things at the grassroots level, including infodemic management, I'm also part of the senior advisory group for COVID. And that's basically a small group I've created here in Malta with senior public health people to basically decide the strategic direction for managing the pandemic throughout, since March 2020. Obviously, we needed to be very responsive and, very much sensitive to changes happening on the ground. There are quite a few more hats, but I think let's focus on these. So this is just as a way of introducing myself, really. Again, this sounds like prehistory, probably for many of you. In January 2020, it sounded like yet another epidemic, like MERS, we have had a couple of years ago. So, people were concerned, but not that concerned. I think the biggest worry we had at that time was securing Chinese translation of our airport pull-ups, like the one you're seeing in the screen, so that basically any arrivals from this was spring festival season could actually follow our public health advice. Fast forward to February. I know we probably don't speak Italian, but this is basically mentioning that there were deaths and a rush of infected people in northern Italy. So that's practically on our doorstep. And then, indeed, lo and behold, early March, we had the first cases. So I think you can relate to this whirlwind that we have faced, and probably you haven't recovered since. Okay, so I think if you fast forward till today, most of you have been doing very similar work from that time on and on, and I must admit it can feel a bit depressing, of course, because people have plans, people make plans, and they might say, "Am I stuck in this rut?" In reality, what we're getting in the future, at least the next few days, next few weeks, for sure, is a bit more of the same, especially here in Europe, but with the addition of our superiors asking us in no uncertain terms to start catching up with our backlog, with the work that we might have put aside because of our COVID-related work. So, yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to cope with everything, and we need to start thinking about how our COVID work, including infodemic management, becomes more sustainable as the pandemic lingers on. Okay, so in the early days, I would say we had to sort of start doing infodemic management before infodemic management was actually invented by WHO. As it so happens, for example, as the pandemic started heating up, we started getting individuals setting up information groups online, and we sort of noticed this. We thought, should we engage? Should we, maybe support these individuals, endorse them for the good work they're doing? It so happened that not everyone had noble intentions, as we realized later on, when one of the biggest one that basically managed to really strike the right key with the public, and the membership of his group exploded. Started sharing some extreme material, and lo and behold, eventually started selling face masks and sanitizers at exorbitant prices. So there we had it. We had to, this guy we sort of were secretly considering whether to endorse or not a few weeks before, a couple of weeks before, literally, now ended up being someone we had to stand up to. And it was not easy, it was not possible basically to stop him because as we were trying to resist him, we were being banned from the group. So obviously it's very difficult to engage. Luckily, I think he was vilified by the local newspapers. And if the Maltese have one characteristic, they don't like being their money being ripped off. So I think that was his suicide. But what I'm trying to say is we realized the power of social media, particularly in this pandemic, as early on as like the first month. And it's clear, obviously, and this is not new. Okay, if you look back through history, especially with epidemics, you do see these information vacuums forming. Okay, science might not be so forthcoming with explanations, with the right data, with the right research, because it takes time. And guess what? Like any other vacuum, it fills up with the first thing it finds, typically rubbish. Okay, and I don't think we need to really be afraid to say we definitely have seen such rubbish being propelled and fueled by social media algorithms that are obviously after clicks. I think you remember these subjects being the main subjects we were dealing with in misinformation back then. And again, the infodemic changes. The infodemic is dynamic. You have to be on the ball because the subjects being circulated tend to shift, and they shift rather quickly. So nowadays, I would say most misinformation or most disinformation is centered around vaccines, particularly adverse effects, people saying that there will be no limit to the number of boosters you have to have, doubts around vaccine efficacy and safety, and obviously, in general, anger at nudges being put in place by governments. Frankly, and I'm being frank here, I think nudges, to some extent, whilst there is always a role for nudges, there will always be that reluctant few that require that push to go forward. Needing a lot of nudges is a sign of failure at infodemic management earlier on in the pandemic. Okay, so I have seen countries where there was a lot heavier heavier misinformation flows that had to then put in very strong nudges. And, it's not nice on anyone to put in nudges, because then people feel actually convinced by the misinformation they have read, and it can become hardship to some extent. So, what will the future look like? Who knows? But what I can tell you is one thing: whatever public health measures we want to put in place, whatever public health measures our governments decide to put in place, if you don't have infodemic management, you actually have nothing. You have ineffective public health measures, because people will comply with public health measures as much as they believe that it's useful. Okay, and that belief, that responsibility towards society, so to say, is eroding fast, because people are tired, people are annoyed. I mean, look at Australia, for example. The extensive lockdowns they have had has angered people. So they might have been believers at the beginning, but now obviously they're feeling it. So again, it's very, very important to maintain this trust within the population through infodemic management. Okay, this is my little cycle in a way, so it's not terribly scientific, but this is how I usually try to do infodemic management of my own. I don't use sophisticated tools. I do basically what probably some of you have already been doing in terms of scouring social media posts, social media groups, trying to find anything that requires debunking, etc., etc. So I can't emphasize enough on the word listen. Okay, unless you listen, you cannot take any action. You have to be in tune with what the population is talking about, with the context of the population. Okay, so I think this has been said in many languages and in many contexts, that we have twice as many ears as mouths, and I think it's very applicable in this situation here. If you want to achieve trust, and trust is key, as you have probably been told already, then you need to listen. Okay, and frankly, again, being a person that has been involved in the strategic direction of the COVID response, I can tell you it's not only useful to listen for infodemic management purposes, but actually it helps you also to gauge what action could work. So what action would be best to take forward with the population. Okay, so you would know what buttons to press, so to say, with the population to try and introduce public health measures. So it's critical anyway. And this is again another little tip I would give you. Listening or observing does not mean you have to reply. You have to act. Sometimes certain misinformation sorts itself out. So you might have already somebody who has engaged very well to that misinformation post, or the general public has resisted it anyway, as you see in the comments under the post. So, and then again, if it's something which is quite fringe and not so mainstream, not so popular, maybe especially if you are MOH staff, engaging with that fringe concept, which has not really yet gained popularity, might give it additional publicity that you don't want to give it. Okay, so this again is a fine balance that you will learn as part of your work in infodemic management. Research, you basically have to remain abreast of the research in readiness for the question, rather than getting the question and trying to make the research at that point. There's such a huge volume of research coming out and changes and news, that it's always good to be aware of what's happening. Also, because you might wish to prepare for answering a particular question. For example, just this week, those of you who might be coming from Europe might have noticed two specific news items. One is that Germany has decided to limit the lower age for taking Moderna, because they're concerned about side effects. Within the same week, literally the next day, we get news that the European Medicines Agency is evaluating an application by Moderna to extend the vaccine to 5 to 11-year-olds. Needless to say, we've got two very serious authorities, very reputable authorities, seemingly taking different directions. So it's not always easy to manage. But again, when I see something like that, I usually also alert colleagues, guys, we're going to face a tsunami on this one. Keep an eye out. What approach shall we take? Okay, so again, Liz was talking about networks. You will have a network after this course is finished and during this course. It's priceless. I can assure you it's priceless. I mean, it's not the first time. I get sent a misinformation post, say from Africa, have never seen it before. I post it in our WhatsApp group. Has anybody seen this? Yes, somebody, responds immediately from, I don't know, Uganda, and they say, yes, we've been seeing it for the past couple of months. In reality, that's not what happened. This is what happened. Boom, that's it. You have your reply. So having a good network, a good supporting network is great. Misinformers are getting smarter and they are sharing research papers, same as we do. Okay. So I must admit, I am moving more towards sharing of guidelines from reputable institutions. You might say misinformers have been eroding the trust in, say, WHO, ECDC, CDC. Yes, but trust me, the general public still believes that these people have an important role to play and are still reputable organizations that have helped us, for example, increase life expectancy by 40 years over the past 100 years. It's also important that when you prepare your reply, focus on the question whilst trying to predict any loopholes that the misinformer might try to exploit in your answer. But otherwise, it's very important to focus on the question. What some misinformers tend to do is when they see that the battle is lost, they try to go off at a tangent and sort of try to put you in an awkward situation by covering then a different subject. So again, deliver the goods, deliver the info, and then best to just not engage any further. Also, because it can get nasty. So some people tend to be very irate, very angry, and they can be quite nasty, actually. So please remember, you should not descend into the same depths as whoever is insulting you online. Respect is always important. And that silent majority that is reading the comments will appreciate you more for it. It's actually the fact that you don't engage in a spat will gain more credibility for the information you have just shared. Incidentally, when you're trying to inoculate with the correct information, it can be either proactive or reactive. Okay, so you might wish to share information straight away on a post of your own, maybe on your department's channel or website. You might wish to engage as a comment to another post. I must admit that personally, maybe it's a local thing, I found that reactive engagement was achieving greater traction. So I was seeing the information I had shared being shared much faster when I engaged on a misinformation post. Probably I was simply riding on the algorithms that propel that misinformation post forward and achieving a wider spread. Again, I don't know if it works for everyone. This we discussed, always read through the comments, may have sorted itself out. And lastly, but I can't, it is so important. If you don't do anything else, do this one. It is super important to invest in your healthcare workers. Your healthcare workers are the people who are trusted by the public. You need to make sure that those are on your side. Those have access to the right information. They're not trapped in echo chambers themselves, and lost, basically, can't be redeemed. Okay. And I would say, for example, if I had to look back on our vaccination rollout, which some of you might be familiar, was actually one of the most rapid in Europe. I think the big credit for that success goes to our family doctors and the time and energy we invested in making sure that the family doctors always had the latest information. Okay, again, rumors of a major side effect of the vaccine, talk to the doctors, tell them what happened, okay? Yes, there was a blood clot in a patient having had, I don't know, AstraZeneca, but we got her in time. She came to hospital, gave her anticoagulants, she's okay. So again, keeping this lubricated exchange with your healthcare worker is usually key to managing the infodemic. Infodemic management and the policymaker. So before actually moving on to the policymaker, I must say, and again, this might hurt a few of you, we still have pockets of colleagues in public health who are working in infectious diseases that might not appreciate the contribution of information flows in the effectiveness of public health measures. So we both agree that public health measures work and are required, but they might not necessarily appreciate yet the fact that information flow seems to modulate the effect of public health measures. In terms of policymakers, I think the feedback I get also from international meetings I attend on behalf of the ministry, I think there's a very strong conscious awareness of how the infodemic itself has affected vaccine uptake, okay, across the world, across continents. So I think many policymakers have realized this, and it may be a window of opportunity to actually start making appeals for setting up sustainable systems for infodemic management. And frankly, we will keep needing infodemic management way after COVID, trust me. I mean, we have had infodemic management before, and I think hand on heart, we have not addressed it properly. Okay, so we always get rumors about supplements that cure cancer and you should stop chemotherapy. I'm sure you've had this in your country. So there's always a role for infodemic management. This is a skill we need to build into our public health systems. We still have, unfortunately, policymakers, especially those of a populist background. I must admit, most populist policymakers tend to be right-wing, but not always. And politicians are human beings just like anybody else. So politicians can get trapped in an echo chamber, just like the man in the street, just like your healthcare worker, even more than your healthcare worker actually, because he or she doesn't have the training. We are seeing anti-vax groups or COVID skeptic groups coalescing and basically building resistance, getting organized. So many of us in Europe have had to face court cases. Many court cases have been lost, unfortunately. We're facing one right now here in Malta by a very small group, actually, around about 30, I believe, Protestants. But yet again, it's taking a lot of our energy to do this, what I'm calling infodemic management within the courts now as well. Okay, so again, tips from someone who has been doing this for the last few months. I think you agree with me that most of your respective populations feel that COVID is something of the past. That's it, it's past, come on, let's move on. I did describe to you how we are all facing challenges of trying to get back to our previous work, but we still have the COVID burden to deal with. So again, we need to think sustainability. Always, again, I come from a small country, we do this all the time. Always stand on the shoulders of giants. We still get a lot of very good output from, can I call them the usual culprits, CDC, ECDC, and there are some very great academic groups out there, the IHME in Seattle. So these are sources that will keep churning priceless information, which you can use for your infodemic management. Always keep your eyes peeled for the next wave of opportunity. As I said, policymakers, for example, are now becoming increasingly aware of the role of the infodemic. So if you see such an opportunity, you might not yet be seeing it in your respective country. Try to make sure to engage with the rest of the public health system in this. And basically, this is again coming back to something that we spoke about earlier. COVID effectively is now just another point on your performance plan, another deliverable you have to work with. This is my last slide. I'm sorry if I took too long. But basically, I cannot leave you before telling you how important it is to preserve yourself. Okay, so burnout has never helped the world. Okay, with burnout, you're not effective. So be careful. Also, it is very important to preserve yourself when infodemic management gets a bit problematic. Okay, many have asked me in the past, what do you do when your government is spreading misinformation in an institutionalized manner? It's not easy. You have to be very careful. I must admit, I have had a period of time when I was in that situation. In that period of time, what I was doing, rather than writing anything on social media, I was simply sharing documents, sharing links to documents, because I felt nobody could sort of prosecute me for sharing, for example, a CDC document, an CDC document. Okay. I can say that for me, it worked. I was never sort of prosecuted for it. I have seen situations in previous courses. I have had previous trainees opening up to me about this. There have been trainees who might have been bolder than that and have sort of taken the bull by the horns, and they have suffered. They have been transferred out of their hospital or into a different setting, ostracized, or even persecuted. So, again, preserve yourself. I think that was my last slide, Tina. I'm not sure if we covered what we planned to discuss adequately. I see a lot of questions in the chat. Not
This
sure
is
if I
great.
managed to take them all.
With your permission, I'm just sharing the screen here for the top voted questions for you.
Sure, perfect.
Perhaps we can take a couple,
yes, of
knowing
course.
your precious time. And
so,
this is, yeah, go ahead.
So I think the first one is a pretty good one. So which misinformation not to act on? Basically, there might be misinformation, which is like, it's the first time you've seen it. Also from the comments, you're judging that it doesn't seem to be gaining traction. People are laughing at the comment, like, haha, what the hell are you talking about? And you've never seen it again, this kind of comment. In that case, you might wish not to engage as an infodemic manager because you might be giving it additional publicity you don't want to. I must admit to have used this technique also with specific fringe healthcare workers for a while, which were anyway already being kind of managed by fellow doctors who were sort of clearly making it clear, listen, this is not, you're talking rubbish, I'm sorry, you're not being ethical, etc., etc. So it was already being controlled at that level. I did not need to engage as a ministry official. So in that case, we actually did not engage, even though he tried to gain publicity again. This person tried to challenge us to television debates, for example, which would have given him great publicity. Ministry decided not to provide that publicity. So it's basically something that it's a hunch, really. There is no quantitative measure, but you basically have to judge yourself whether something is worth, has potential to grow and is worth arresting now while it's still young, or else it's something that will probably die on its own. Misinformation in multilingual societies, misinformation carries across borders very, very easily, from one language to the other, from one platform to the other. So in my case, we are bilingual actually here, so you can have posts in Maltese and posts in English. I tend to engage on the post in the language that it is written in as much as possible. So, okay, there's no one size fits all, agreed. No, I would actually, I think if there is one proven method that can be generally applied to all countries or to different countries, is to apply social media listening. So if you have the opportunity to apply social media listening to social media flows in your country, that is one good, very good way to address misinformation. But nonetheless, you always have to keep in mind the context. So different countries have different contexts. We can't talk about making sacrifices in people who barely have enough income to eat, for example. Yes, how do you address misinformation when it's coming from healthcare workers? By informing the rest of the healthcare workers. I think that is the best method we have found locally. Making sure that the rest of the community is well informed tends to crowd out that healthcare worker or healthcare workers. Burnout fatigue, we spoke about. Nudges versus push, definitely, always very context and culture specific. And again, it's always good to have that finger on the pulse to see which nudge is likely to work without causing too much trouble. Okay, so it's funny that we have had people resisting getting a vaccination for almost a year now. There was a football game of their favorite team in the UK. They rushed to get the vaccine because they want to see it. Simple as that. So it's funny what works on people and what not. Okay. I think effective tools we discussed a bit. What about when government health agency are making uninformed decisions? Yes, it happens. Danjuma's question I'm looking at. As I said earlier, so I have had experience myself, as probably many of you have had. I don't think I will be letting out any cat out of the bag if I say that I come from a country which is highly dependent on tourism. In summer 2020, we had the economy on its knees, especially the hospitality industry, and they just wanted to open up as much as possible to grab as much as possible of the market. We told them as public health, guys, don't do it. If you do it, we're just going to get a massive spike and the market will close on us anyway because nobody wants to come to a COVID-infested country. They didn't listen to us, and that's exactly what's happened. But that was a very tense period, I must admit. It was a very, very tense period where we basically were pretty much ostracized as public health. You wouldn't admit in public like that you're public health. So, or even worse, managing the infodemic. So what else? Yeah. Research tools. It's funny, but I guess one of my best tools is Google. Okay, nothing fancy. I don't go on bids or Web of Science or this sort of thing. It's amazing how much more effective Google is becoming at finding those nuggets of information. But one word of caution. What you'll get in Google is typically the newspaper article on, yes, Tina is saying that we will be discussing this later on. I am just telling you my own take. Google will take you to a news article discussing that research. Do that little bit more effort and try to find the original article, because obviously media always has some kind of bias of some sort, or they might just not have understood. So try to always find the original source of what you encounter. I must admit, I find incredibly useful in the morning. Sometimes as I'm having breakfast, I get this Google News update on my mobile, and I see like the latest news. And again, I pick up a lot of stuff there, which I then obviously investigate further. So, yeah, government.
I think
again,
this is it, Neville.
Yeah, I think we're a bit short of time anyway.
Yeah. So, but this has been a really rich discussion, both on Slido and here. Liz, did you have any last questions for Neville, or shall we conclude?
That was a beautiful job, Neville. I think you have a lot of fans. Don't worry, this is not the last time you'll see Neville in this training. And
he's a coach for Wisdom Group 18, and the rest we don't tell.
So you'll see more of Neville in the future. But thank you so much, Neville. You always speak wisdom, and I'm always smarter after hearing you talk.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Neville, very much.